Welcome to the deep dive. You've brought us some really significant material today, focusing on a proposed law in Denmark that could, well, fundamentally change how the government collects and uses the data of its citizens. This isn't just about a minor policy tweak, is it? It really touches on the core of personal privacy in this digital age.
Exactly. We have news articles outlining this specific piece of legislation, and it sparked quite a debate, as you might expect, particularly around what it actually means for the individual.
Absolutely. So our mission with this deep dive is really to cut through the noise, understand the essence of this proposal. What exactly is Denmark planning? What are the stated reasons? And maybe most importantly, what are the potential impacts on, individual privacy and freedom? We want to equip everyone with a clear understanding. Okay, let's unpack this. What's the central idea here?
Okay, so at its core, the Danish Security and Intelligence Service, PET, they're seeking a pretty substantial expansion of their powers. They want the authority to gather and analyze what they're calling larger coherent datasets, basically a wide range of info on Danish citizens, businesses, organizations.
Right. So this isn't about targeting individuals who are already suspected of something.
Precisely. That's the key difference. The intention is to set up an analysis platform using artificial intelligence. This system would be designed to, identify patterns within these huge data sets, patterns that might flag individuals, groups, movements, things that could be relevant for future investigation, specifically concerning threats like terrorism, sabotage, or espionage.
Okay.
So what we're really looking at is the potential for like a complete digital profile of every citizen being put together, whether they're suspected of anything or not.
The justification then is national security. We hear that a lot, don't we? What's the official line from the Danish government?
Well, the official explanation, coming from Justice Minister Peter Hummelgaard, is that the sheer volume and speed of data today means they need this kind of large-scale processing to, as he put it, find the needle in the haystack when identifying threats. He's also been careful to say, though, that Pete isn't interested in reading everyone's private messages, but more about the broad patterns.
Right, looking for those bigger signals. But this feels like a huge departure from how intelligence services have normally operated, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It represents a fundamental paradigm shift. Historically, these kinds of broad surveillance powers have mostly been with the Defense Intelligence Service, FE, and their focus has largely been external foreign individuals, foreign entities. This new law would empower PT, the domestic service, to monitor all Danish citizens, even with no prior suspicion.
That lack of prior suspicion, that really seems to be the critical point, doesn't it?
It is, yeah. Pernille Boye Koch from the Institute for Human Rights called it exactly that, a fundamental paradigm shift. Currently, Pew generally needs some reasonable basis, some suspicion before they can closely monitor someone. This new proposal. It opens the door to what they call broad trawls of data, pulling together and analyzing all sorts of different data sets on a massive scale.
Broad trawls. Yeah, that phrase itself makes you wonder about the extent of this. What specific types of data are we talking about? What's this AI going to be looking at?
Well, the scope is pretty extensive. It touches on a lot of aspects of daily life. The platform would pull in information from publicly available online sources, think social media, online forums, blogs, even academic papers, company websites.
Okay, so a vast amount of public digital information, but it doesn't stop there, right?
No, not at all. They also plan to use data from data brokers. These are the companies whose whole business is collecting and selling information about our online behavior, what we buy, where we go.
Right, the commercial tracking data.
Exactly. That data can be incredibly detailed, very intimate. Plus, the platform would also use data from FE, though that's expected mostly to be about non-Danish residents.
A mix of domestic and foreign-focused data, then.
Right. But maybe the most significant piece, especially regarding personal privacy, is the plan to integrate data from other Danish public authorities. We're talking state, regional, municipal levels. These authorities would be legally obligated to hand over requested information to PET.
Wow. So potentially everything from tax records, employment info to, like one source mentioned, even what books you borrow from the library. Denmark's super digitized, right?
Yeah.
So there's a ton of personal info stored by public bodies.
Right.
And this law could just open the floodgates for PET.
That's the concern. And here's a really key point about privacy. The citizens whose data is being collected and analyzed like this, they won't be told it's happening.
Okay, that immediately raises huge questions. Transparency, the right to know what your government is doing with your personal information, and how long would they keep this data?
The proposal suggests a retention period of up to 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah. Which brings up its own set of concerns about how historical data might be used down the line in ways we can't even imagine today.
20 years is an eternity in the digital world,
Hmm.
where tech and, social norms change so fast. Okay, so we have a clearer picture of what's proposed. Now let's really dig into the core focus today. The concerns and criticisms, especially around personal privacy. It sounds like there are a lot of red flags being raised.
There really are. A primary worry is just the lack of strong legal safeguards for individuals. Experts, organizations, they're calling for things like an independent legal body to actually assess the data sources AKT wants to use, and for much greater transparency about how this surveillance would actually work, to protect privacy.
That makes total sense. If you're collecting this much personal data without individual suspicion, you absolutely need strong oversight. To prevent abuse, make sure it's proportional.
Absolutely. The Institute for Human Rights, they've expressed serious doubts about whether this law is even compatible with fundamental human rights, especially the right to privacy. And the legal think tank Justitia has been really vocal, saying this is mass surveillance of Danish citizens on a scale Denmark hasn't seen before, and crucially, without any prior suspicion.
Mass surveillance without suspicion. That hits right at the privacy of every single Danish citizen.
It does. Michael Schultz-Knudsen from Justitia really emphasized this point. Previous surveillance might have targeted specific people relevant to investigations, but this new law, pulling in data sets from authorities, social media, it impacts the privacy of everyone. The worry is we're shifting from targeted surveillance to a system of generalized data collection that just erodes the basic expectation of privacy for the whole population.
So it's not just about catching the bad guys anymore. It's about the systematic collection and analysis of data on everybody, regardless of what they've done.
That's the absolute heart of the privacy concern. And it leads to what some are calling a potential paradox. The law is pitched as necessary to protect a free and democratic society, but critics argue it could actually undermine those very principles by stomping on personal privacy and chilling fundamental freedoms.
How? How could this kind of broad data collection, supposedly for security, actually harm the foundations of a free society?
Well, a big worry is the chilling effect, on freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, core democratic rights that depend on people feeling free to communicate and associate without fearing government eyes, are on them. A survey by Nordic Human Rights Institutes actually found that 17% of Danes already avoid public debate online because they're worried about being monitored by police or intelligence. This law, it could make that feeling of being watched much, much worse.
Wow, 17% already self-censoring. That's significant. This new law sounds like it could cast an even longer shadow, impacting privacy and how people express themselves.
Exactly. Melanie Hartvigsen, a PhD candidate who studies intelligence services and accountability, really stresses this. Our democracy is built on rights like privacy, free speech, assembly. When you dramatically increase surveillance pressure, like this law seems to do with its broad data collection, you inevitably risk scaring citizens away from expressing themselves, from participating in democracy, because they fear future consequences based on how their personal data might be interpreted later on.
It's like creating an environment where people think twice before saying something critical, or even doing something perfectly legal, just because they know their data is being vacuumed up and could be looked at later. It chips away at that private space for thought and action.
Precisely. And as Hartvigsen points out, in a super digitized country like Denmark, the way data is all linked together just amplifies these privacy worries. Even something seemingly minor, like borrowing a library book, it's digitally recorded, linked to your personal ID number. This whole web of connected data means the potential to build a really comprehensive, intrusive picture of someone's life is very real under this proposal.
So it's not just online stuff, it's how all these different data points from various parts of life can be put together, potentially drawing conclusions about people, further shrinking their personal privacy.
Right. And that 20-year data retention period makes these privacy worries even more intense. Hartvigsen makes a crucial point. What's seen as acceptable speech or behavior today might not be in 10 or 15 years. Holding on to this vast amount of personal data for so long creates a risk it could be used against people based on future standards or interpretations, impacting their privacy retroactively.
That's a really unsettling thought, data collected now, under today's rules, being used in ways we can't foresee years from now, undermining control over your own personal history and privacy.
Absolutely. And the concerns go beyond free speech. Ida Daunton from the Danish Council of Ethics raises big ethical questions about trust in public services, especially healthcare. Think about the doctor-patient relationship, the fundamental expectation of privacy there. If people start worrying that their health data might be shared with P without them knowing as part of this broad collection, they might hesitate to even seek medical care they need.
It's deeply concerning for just basic well-being. People avoiding doctors because they fear their private medical info gets swept up in a surveillance net. That's a massive erosion of trust and privacy in a really sensitive area.
It is. And Donkin connects this potential erosion of trust around health data privacy to a wider trend, declining trust in democratic institutions generally. Research like the Metoudredningen 2.0 project, led by Michael Bang-Peterson, shows that while trust levels in Denmark are still relatively high globally, they have been slipping. One survey even found nearly a third of Danes have low trust in their local municipality following the law, suggesting there's already some unease about how securely and privately personal data held by public bodies is being handled.
So there's already a segment of the population worried about the privacy of their data held by the government. This new law sounds like it could really pour fuel on that fire and erode personal privacy further.
Exactly. Peterson points out that while, yeah, many Danes might accept some surveillance for national security, there's a significant and growing minority that's skeptical. A law like this, with its sweeping data collection and major privacy implications, could absolutely intensify that mistrust, maybe creating a more adversarial relationship between citizens and the state.
Yeah, it sounds like it could deepen the cracks in the trust some people already have, affecting their sense of personal privacy and security when dealing with public institutions.
That's the underlying fear. Peterson even draws a parallel cautiously with the U.S., where trust in the political system has become so polarized. While the situation's different in Denmark, the potential for similar divides to open up around government surveillance and personal privacy is a real concern. He suggests that seriously addressing the privacy worries of this skeptical group, implementing stronger legal safeguards focused on protecting individual liberties that could be crucial to push back against this growing mistrust and protect the fundamental right to personal privacy.
Right. So more transparency, clear legal limits on data collection and use that could be key to reassuring people and protecting privacy with this kind of law. Now, looking at the process itself, the legislative side, is there a sense this major piece of legislation is getting the careful consideration it needs, especially regarding its impact on personal privacy?
Well, that's another big point of criticism, actually. The current plan aims for the law to take effect really soon, July 1st. But the actual bill hasn't even been formally presented to Parliament yet. Opposition parties, Liberal Alliance, Socialist People's Party, Red-Green Alliance, they've voiced strong objections. They're saying there hasn't been enough preparation, not enough public debate on something with such huge implications for personal privacy.
July 1st. That's
No.
incredibly fast, isn't it? For such a potentially transformative law that directly impacts every citizen's personal privacy.
It does seem very compressed. Stefan Larsson from the Liberal Alliance has publicly stated his serious concerns, stressing the need for a really thorough, considered debate in the parliamentary committee, given how sensitive this is and how directly it affects personal privacy. As things stand, they expect the bill maybe end of April, with a technical review on May 13th.
A very tight schedule indeed for reviewing and debating something with such massive potential consequences for privacy and civil liberties. What's the government saying in response to these criticisms about the speed and the perceived lack of discussion on the privacy issues?
Justice Minister Hummelgaard, he points to the fact that a draft bill was circulated for public consultation back in early February, and he says there will be the standard 3 readings in Parliament once the bill is formally introduced. He argues these established procedures give enough opportunity for discussion and scrutiny, including looking at the privacy aspects.
So the government's position is that the normal parliamentary process is sufficient to handle the complexities and privacy implications within this time frame.
That's what they're saying. And regarding those big concerns about the law potentially violating human rights, especially privacy rights, the Justice Ministry has put out statements saying their assessment is that the proposed rules can be implemented in a way that lines up with Denmark's international obligations.
Okay, so the government believes it's legally sound on human rights, including privacy, and that there's been enough chance for input. But as we've discussed, it sounds like many experts and a decent chunk of the public have serious reservations, particularly about the potential hit to personal privacy and what it means for basic freedoms.
That sums it up pretty well. The core tension is right there. The government's stated need to boost national security through broad data collection versus the very substantial concerns from experts and citizens about major infringements on personal privacy, fundamental rights, and the potential damage to public trust.
It's that classic balancing act, isn't it? But it sounds like this proposal is tilting the scales in a direction many fear could have really serious long-term consequences for personal privacy and, well, the nature of a free, democratic society. Well, this has been a really crucial deep dive into a complex and very timely issue with profound implications for individual privacy in Denmark. Thank you for bringing such clarity and insight.
My pleasure. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to quickly recap our discussion today, we've looked at this proposed Danish law giving the intelligence service, PET, much wider powers to collect and analyze huge amounts of citizen data for national security. We talked about the vast range of data sources, social media, data brokers, government records, potentially sensitive stuff. We heard the government's justification. But the main focus has been on the serious concerns from experts and organizations. The potential damage to personal privacy due to weak safeguards, the risk of a chilling effect on free speech and assembly, and the potential to further erode public trust.
And that fast-track timeline for implementation, combined with the criticisms about not enough public debate, just adds to the anxiety around its potential impact on individual personal privacy.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe the thought to leave everyone with is this fundamental question. In our increasingly digital world where our lives create so much data, where do we draw the line? Where do we as individuals and as society say stop when it comes to the state collecting and analyzing personal data for security? What are the long-term effects of giving governments such broad data powers, not just for stopping threats, but for the very essence of personal privacy, the health of democracy, and our individual sense of freedom from unwarranted government intrusion? It's a question that really demands ongoing thought and engagement as digital rights and surveillance continue to evolve. Thank you for joining us for this important deep dive.